Hi, my name is Nick Holland. I'm a Bronte biographer, and welcome to the House of Bronte, where today we're going to say happy birthday to Jane Austen and look at the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen. Welcome to the House of Bronte's look at Jane Austen and the Brontes, especially Charlotte Bronte. And today, as I sit here and speak, it's the 16th of December 2024. So I'm saying happy birthday, Jane Austen. This was the day that Jane Austen was born. Now, there's sort of a literary rivalry growing up almost, I think, between the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen. And in my opinion, there doesn't need to be, because they were both incredible writers. They were all incredible writers, Charlotte, Emily, Anne Bronte and Jane Austen. But Jane Austen was born on this day, 16th December 1775, and she changed the world of literature forever. She changed the world of movies forever and television, drama adaptations forever, but long after her life, of course. So the first thing we're going to say in this episode is that Jane Austen didn't know the Bronte sisters. The Bronte sisters didn't know Jane Austen personally, of course. We'll get that out of the way, because Jane Austen died early. Unfortunately, like the Brontes, she died far too young, but she died in 1817. And Charlotte Bronte, born 1816, was the only writing Bronte sister who was alive during the life of Jane Austen. So they'd never knew each other. The Brontes, did they read Jane Austen's books? We'll find out. Quick answer, yes, but not as much as we might expect. Jane Austen, of course, never got a chance to read a Bronte sisters book. But so it's sort of literary rivalries happened. I've been to the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth a lot. I was first right to give a book signing there, which was amazing. Other than Brontes signing their own works. Under the names of Bell, the pseudonyms they used. But when you go to the museum, which I heartily recommend if you get a chance to go to Haworth in West Yorkshire, if you get the chance, go. Amazing place, go to the Bronte Parsonage Museum. But I was speaking to a couple of the guides, a couple of volunteers at the museum, long-standing volunteers, and I asked them, what are the most common questions you get asked here at the Bronte Parsonage Museum? And they said the two questions they get asked most are, is this where Jane Austen lived? And is this where Pride and Prejudice was written? And the answer to both those, no and no. Hell no. But people get Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte especially mixed up in their minds, because both were incredible women writers in the early to mid 19th century. So we've got that similarity. They both wrote occasionally romance, had parts to play in their novels, but the Bronte novels and Jane Austen's novels were much more than that. Jane Austen especially, I think, gets ring-fenced as a romance writer. And if you read her books, which again I heartily recommend, there's so much more going on. They're really humorous, they're really satirical, they're dark in places. They're looking at society at the time, the society Jane Austen and her family and her readers knew. I'll go on to one other little digression here. Pronunciation. I've been saying Jane Austen. I know some people, especially American fans, and Jane and the Brontes are huge in America, which is brilliant. They have to pronounce Jane Austen, or I can't do American accent, or Austen, as in instead of Austin. Austen. I would say Austen. I think that's the traditional English pronunciation. But we have the same problem when it comes to the Brontes. I've loved the Brontes since I first encountered them as a teenager. I first read Wuthering Heights when I started my English degree back in the 1980s, 89. And in my mind then, straight away it was Bronte. It was Bronte. It got the diaeresis for two little dots. Charlotte Brontë, Emily Bronte, Anne Bronte. That was in my mind. I've been saying that all my life. And when I do Bronte talks, which I often do, I always say, Anne Bronte, Emily Bronte. Sometimes people say to me, it's not Bronte, it's Bronte. Shorter. You don't extend the E, it's just an Bronte. Bronte sisters. So now I've sort of mixed them up in my mind. Sometimes when I'm speaking, I'll say Bronte, sometimes I'll say Bronte. But the truth is, we don't know. We don't know how it's pronounced. The diaeresis, the two dots, was something the sisters themselves added. It wasn't in the family name. The family name was taken by Patrick Bronte. He was called Patrick Prunty or Brunty initially. He just changed the name. So nobody knows how it was pronounced. There are no recordings, of course. It could be anything. So call it what you like. Same with Jane Austen. So we'll look at Jane Austen and the Brontes. So all the Brontes were really well read. They didn't have a lot of formal education by modern standards, but they read a lot inside that parsonage. They loved reading from an early age. My father, Patrick, and Aunt Branwell, who helped bring them up, really encouraged this love of learning. They had a large library in Haworth Parsonage itself. There's a huge library nearby at Pondon Hall, which some say inspired Wuthering Heights, a few miles across the moors from Haworth. And we know Emily used to walk there, go to this huge, vast, the largest private library in Europe at this time. So lots of books to read, and they loved reading. So you would have expected them to have read a lot of Jane Austen, but we know, as we'll see in a moment in a letter from Charlotte Brontë, that's not actually the case. The Bronte sisters especially loved Walter Scott, and they loved Thackeray. Charlotte Brontë especially loved Thackeray. But what did they think of Jane Austen? And we find out in a letter Charlotte Brontë sent to a literary critic and a writer himself called G.H. Lewis. And again, you might pronounce it Lewis, because his name is Lewes, but I'm going to say Lewis. Now, Lewis was a critic. He was one of the early critics of Jane Eyre. Charlotte Brontë liked his criticism, even though, he could be... he looked at both sides. He wasn't just praising the novels. But Charlotte Brontë liked what he was saying. She got into a correspondence with him via her publisher, George Smith. And she later met Lewis and said she burst into tears when she saw him, because he looked so much like Emily Bronte, her sister, who by that time had died. Lewis, by the way, was a very interesting fellow himself. He was in an open marriage, which I suppose was a bit controversial for early to mid 19th century, but he's more famous for the long-term relationship he had with a woman called Mary Ann Evans, who is better known to us all as the writer George Eliot, and they're buried next to each other. So we're looking at a letter here that Charlotte Brontë sent to G.H. Lewis. This is a brilliant book, by the way, another book I recommend, Charlotte Brontë Selected Letters. So many amazing letters. Charlotte Brontë was a really consummate letter writer. She wrote letters just as brilliantly as she wrote her novels. And there's a great quote from a widower, Arthur Bell Nichols, that he said about her letters on the back. Says, they were dangerous as Lucifer matches. And he sent instruction to Ellen Nussey, a friend, burn after reading, burn her letters, so posterity doesn't find out the really sharp character Charlotte Brontë could have. But Ellen didn't burn the letters, and we found out. So this was a letter sent to G.H. Lewis on the 12th of January 1848. Now at this point, Jane Eyre is published. It's a huge success. Lewis has reviewed Jane Eyre, but he's not met Charlotte yet. He thinks she's Currer Bell. And even Charlotte's publishers still don't know that they were the Bronte sisters. They think they're still the Bell brothers. But in this correspondence with Lewis, Lewis has recommended that Charlotte Brontë reads Jane Eyre. So he's a big fan of Jane Eyre, of Jane Austen, This is why people get mixed up, isn't it? I'm not deleting this blooper. It's staying in because I've demonstrated myself why people get Jane Eyre and Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice and Charlotte Brontë all mixed up. Too many Janes. Lewis recommended that Charlotte Corabell read Jane Austen. And Charlotte took that advice and she writes back to him. And she says on the 12th January 1848 to Lewis, "Why do you like Miss Austen so much? I am puzzled on that point. What induced you to say that you would rather have written Pride and Prejudice or Tom Jones than any of the Waverley novels? I had not seen Pride and Prejudice till I read that sentence of yours, and then I got the book and studied it. And what did I find? An accurate, daguerreotyped portrait of a commonplace face, a carefully fenced, highly cultivated garden with neat borders and delicate flowers, but no glance of a bright, vivid physiognomy, no open country, no fresh air, no Blue Hill, no Bonnie Beck. I should hardly like to live with her ladies and gentlemen in their elegant but confined houses. These observations will probably irritate you, but I shall run the risk." So that's what Charlotte Brontë thinks upon first reading Pride and Prejudice. Charlotte Brontë was really well read, and at the time she's already written Jane Eyre, she hadn't read any Jane Austen before that, and she's not hugely impressed. It's all too chocolate box, we could say, for Charlotte's taste. There's no moors, there's no nature, there's no wildness. But they were writing about different things or different parts of society. So I think, in my opinion, Charlotte was being a bit harsh to Jane Austen. If she read more Jane Austen, which we'll see in a moment that she did, maybe she'd have got a better opinion of what Jane Austen's work was really about and how magical it really is. And I think she was defending, Walter Scott as well. She said Lewis had said he'd rather read Jane Austen or Fielding, Tom Jones, rather than Waverley novels, which were Walter Scott's novels. And Charlotte Brontë absolutely adored Walter Scott, and she adored his Scottish portrayals of Bonnie Becks, as she said, and the moors of Scotland, which reminded her of the moors of Yorkshire and Haworth. So she missed the moors in Jane Austen's writing. But what did she think of Jane Austen later, a couple of years later? This time she's writing to W.S. Williams, her publishers, and this is 2 years later. This is April 1850. A lot's changed in that 2 years. Williams, Smith, Lewis know who Corabell is. They know it's Charlotte Brontë. Emily Brontë and Anne Brontë have passed away. They've died. Charlotte's alone. She's still writing, and she's read more books. We know that Smith, the publisher, and Williams sent her lots and lots and lots of books. Books were expensive at the time. They're a publisher, they got lots of books, and they sent a lot up to Haworth for Charlotte Brontë to read. So in this letter, 12th April 1850, Charlotte Brontë writes to Williams about Jane Austen. And she said, "I have likewise read one of Miss Austen's works, Emma. Read it with interest and just the degree of admiration which Miss Austen herself would have thought sensible and suitable. Anything like warmth or enthusiasm, anything energetic, poignant, heartfelt is utterly out of place in commending these works. All such demonstration the authoress would have met with a well-bred sneer, would have calmly scorned as outre and extravagant. She does her business of delineating the surface of the lives of genteel English people curiously well. There is a Chinese fidelity, a miniature delicacy in the painting. She ruffles her reader by nothing vehement, disturbs him by nothing profound. The passions are perfectly unknown to her. She rejects even a speaking acquaintance with that stormy sisterhood. Even to the feelings she vouchsafes no more than an occasional, graceful but distant recognition. Too frequent converse with them would ruffle the smooth elegance of her progress. Her business is not half so much with the human heart as with the human eyes, mouth, hands and feet. What sees keenly, speaks aptly, moves flexibly, it suits her to study. But what throbs fast and full, though hidden, what the blood rushes through, what is the unseen seat of life and the sentient target of death, this Miss Austen ignores. She no more with her mind's eye beholds the heart of her race than each man with bodily vision sees a heart in his heaving breast. Jane Austen was a complete and most sensible lady, but very incomplete and rather insensible, not senseless, that's Charlotte words, not senseless woman. If this is heresy, I cannot help it. If I said to some people, Lewis for instance, they would directly accuse me of advocating exaggerated heroics, but I'm not afraid of your falling into any such vulgar error. Believe me, yours sincerely, C. Bronte. That's a good example of a Charlotte Brontë letter. She always spoke what was on her mind, what was in her heart. She never held back. She always gave an opinion. As they say in Yorkshire, she called a spade a spade. So she's gone back and looked at Jane Austen again. She's read Emma now, as well as Pride and Prejudice. She may have read other Jane Austen works. And she likes her more. She says she's sensible. She says she's not senseless. She's keen to point that out. But still, she says Jane Austen doesn't know the human heart. Not as far as Charlotte's concerned. She doesn't deal with the human heart. She deals with the niceties, feet, mouth, arms, appearances, basically, rather than what's inside. It's what Charlotte wants to write about, wants to read about. And again, I wouldn't agree with what Charlotte says there, and I think most Jane Austen and literature fans wouldn't agree with that, because Jane Austen certainly could get inside a person and certainly knew what was in their heart and put it on the paper, because there is a surface in Jane Austen's work, but there's a level below it, and you have to look at what's going on the surface and what's going on in the characters' minds, and that's really part of the magic of Jane Austen's satire, of Jane Austen's novel writing. And it's why I think Jane Austen is right up there in the Premier League, at the top of the Premier League of writing. She's a writer we can all enjoy, and as long as this world turns, as long as we keep spinning around that sun, who knows what 400 years will bring. Robots, AI robots will be making and bringing my coffee, hopefully. Well, I won't be here, but that would be great. But people still read, I'm sure. I don't know what form the books will be, but they'll read the Brontes, but they absolutely certainly will read Jane Austen. It's my favourite Jane Austen novel, and it's a close run thing because all her novels are amazing, and it's very close between Pride and Prejudice in my mind, Sense and Sensibility, and Northanger Abbey. I love particularly Northanger Abbey because it's very funny. It mocks Gothic horror conventions, Gothic novels. Very, very well mocked indeed. They know they've been mocked once they've read this book. So it's brilliant, and still, of course, it deals with the human heart, no matter what Charlotte Brontë says. But I've just picked it up because it mentions like all Jane Austen's books. It mentions festivities, it mentions partying, mentions Christmas, and we're nearly at Christmas. In Jane Austen's books, she often refers to Christmas gaieties. Now, Jane Austen was from a higher social circle than Charlotte. She wasn't necessarily born into it. They were both daughters of Church of England clergymen, but her brother came into a very wealthy family, was adopted into it, and that changed the Austen family's prospects, really. And Jane started to move in more elevated circles. So she was really, I'd say, upper middle class, whereas the Brontes were lower middle class. But they were both clergymen's daughters. But Jane Austen likes to write about festivities and Christmas festivities. So in Northanger Abbey, see Catherine Morland, she said, "Dress is at all times a frivolous distinction. An excessive solicitude about it often destroys its aim. Catherine knew this all too well. Her great aunt had read her a lecture on the subject only the Christmas before, and yet she lay awake 10 minutes on Wednesday night debating between her spotted and her tambored muslin. So again, that's another theme, but you'll see often in Jane Austen's books, generational differences. The young people want to party, they want the nice dresses, and the old people, even at Christmas, are lecturing them. Don't wear fancy clothing, don't spend too much time, too much money on clothing, don't think about romance and balls, ball gowns and dancing. Don't think about James Lefroy, Jane. Think about religion, possibly at Christmas time. Think about serious things, but the young people say no. I want to party, and that's at the heart of Christmas for Jane Austen's society and in Jane Austen's novels. So I'd recommend Northanger Abbey. I'd recommend any Jane Austen novel. So did Emily Bronte, did Anne Bronte read Jane Austen? We don't know. But I think Jane Austen and Anne Bronte are the most like writers. They both had satirical elements to their work. And George Moore, who was himself a really good writer, Irish novelist and critic of the late 19th, early 20th century. He was a huge fan of Anne Bronte. And he said about Anne, if she'd lived 10 more years, she would have taken a spot beside Jane Austen. Perhaps even a higher spot, that was Moore's words, perhaps even a higher spot. Only time stopped Anne Bronte creating more than 2 novels. And if she'd done more, we'd be looking at Anne Bronte, like Jane Austen, is the very, very finest novelist, the finest writer, dissector of the human heart, human emotions. And that's what Charlotte Brontë, who was a very perceptive woman, an amazing writer, but that's what she failed to see in Jane Austen's novels. But Jane Austen really got to what it was like to be a human. It didn't matter if you were in a stately home, in the ballrooms, in the fine manicured gardens, or if you're on the moors, or if you're in a parsonage, or if you're just, in a little rundown house, wherever you are, the heart's the same, the mind, the ambition's the same. And that's really what Jane Austen's saying. She's looking not at the finery, at what's inside us at Christmas time and beyond. So I really want to say happy birthday, Jane Austen, you wonderful writer. Yeah, I'm in Team Austen and Team Bronte. I think we can be both. We can love Jane Austen, we can love Charlotte Bronte, we can love Emily and Anne Bronte, and we can love great books. That's at the heart of the House of Bronte channel. So look out for more Christmas posts about the Brontes, as I said, coming up. We get ever closer to that big day when Santa's getting ready now, the sleigh's being powered up. So keep coming back to this channel, subscribe please for more videos like it, share it, tell people about the House of Bronte, and I'll see you for another House of Bronte post.